Right now, we're facing an uncertain future. And the first thing that we can actually remember is that nothing is really certain. You can't change the past, and your future exists only in potential. And in this potential, you have to be empowered to create your future in this present moment right now. Regardless of economic conditions or anything else that's changing in the world, I want you to know that you have purpose. This is Life, Love, and Lessons. Tonight, I'm honored to have with me Alyssa Gruber, psychotherapist from New York City. She is a Zen meditation guru, a trauma and addiction specialist, a change maker, an advocate, and an author. Look for her books to be coming soon to a store near you. We also have Dr. Ish Major, host of Marriage Boot Camp on WeTV. And let me tell you, there's a lot of things we could talk about. We could devote a whole show just to that, because when we think about all of the things that are going on in the world, relationships are suffering. Dr. Ish is a board certified and internationally renowned psychiatrist, and we are honored to have Dr. Ish with us tonight. So welcome. Judge Lynn took the night off, and so we will be joined shortly by a special guest who will join us in a minute, and I think you'll be delighted. And we'd just like to welcome everyone. And we know you could have done anything else on this Wednesday evening, but tonight we're talking about a very serious topic, PTSD. And so we hope that you'll find the information helpful. But before we kind of just jump right into it, I think we could have a healthy discussion on really, what's happening in the world right now. When we think of what we're seeing and when we think of just waiting for the pandemic to end, are people putting things off? What do y'all think?
Yeah, I think folks are having a few. I'm gonna jump right in. Sorry, no. I think folks are having a couple of different reactions. I know what I'm seeing with a lot of couples, right? It's a lot of either or. It's not a lot of middle ground, because the middle ground has literally fallen out from underneath us. So with couples in particular, I'm seeing a lot of folks are saying, hey, you know what? Let's fall in love. Let's move in together, and let's have some babies. Maybe or maybe not get married. Right? But then on the opposite end of that spectrum, there's the other group of couples who are saying, hey, you know what? As soon as the door gets slightly cracked, buddy, I'm out of here. Right? And so I think, I think we're in this weird middle kind of space. What are we supposed to be doing? Is it okay to just kind of let things pause and just be there and maybe fall off a level or two? Or is there something wrong with me if I'm not trying to overachieve and come out of this thing bigger and badder and bolder than I went in? So that's what I'm seeing with a lot of my couples. Alyssa, what's your take on that?
Yeah, I think that two things are happening. One thing I'd like to talk about briefly, and it certainly could warrant a whole conversation, is the notion of demystifying the hustle. We've talked about this before, how especially in Western culture, we are just rapidly addicted to doing, creating, producing, achieving. And so I do think that there's a rift now with those who feel like they have to be hyper productive, because shame on them if they're not making best use of this time. And on the other end of the spectrum are people who are saying, you know what, I'm going to let this be a natural sort of induced pause, a time where I'm using this to my own benefit for healing and wellness. And then I think there's everyone in between. And I think people vacillate. There are days where I feel hyper productive, and there are other days where I sort of just want to lay on the yoga mat and play with my dog, confessedly. And the key there is not what am I doing each day that matters, but how am I treating myself on those days? Can I have compassion for myself on the days where I'm laying and playing with my dog? Or am I only able to like myself on the days when I'm achieving? Because if I observe that, that is residue from, how I've been indoctrinated and how I've been raised and what our culture tells us. So whether it's overachieving in relationships or sort of saying, I'm out of here, I think the main takeaway for me is just being really compassionate towards ourselves and others, because honestly, we don't know what's going on. I mean, right. You sort of look around and extrapolate, but these are unprecedented times.
And everything I was going to say, and everything that people are feeling and everything that people are doing, they just need to know that it is valid and it is okay, right? There is no blueprint for this. So there is no right or wrong way to do it or to get through it. The goal is just to get through it.
Yeah, and I was just going to say, in the beginning of the pandemic, when we thought it was just only going to be a short time, you know, people said, oh, you know, I'm not going to drink until it's over, or I'm going to set some goal and I'm going to abstain from doing certain things till it's over. And now they realize that it's going to be a long time. So we're seeing more people, you know, picking up their bad habits again, or picking up things that, you know, are not necessarily good for them, or returning to their own ways. So what do you think we can do about that?
Well, I think that one of the things that I think is relevant now and always is just the notion of what serves my highest good. Not just in this moment where I have the immediate craving for some sort of stimulus, but if I look at my life writ large, what serves my highest good? It's really easy to get antsy at home. Your partner's a pain in the neck, the kids are screaming, to, you know, just go stand in front of the refrigerator and graze. Or, you know, you have a headache, you're not sure where the finances are going to stabilize, to pick up that extra drink that you don't really need. So I think a really important metric is just to ask yourself, like, is this serving my highest good? Whatever that looks like.
Yeah, and the other question you should ask is, how do I want to feel in this moment? And to know that, you need to know how you are feeling. Like I said, if you're standing in front of the refrigerator and you're just gobbling up everything in there, most of us who have been doing that, we're not hungry, we're just bored. So how am I really feeling right now, and how do I want to feel? And I think now more than ever, it's easy as we all come to the realization that this will not be over with quickly, right? And we don't have an end in sight. It's easy to fall into the Groundhog Day trap and think that every day is going to be like the next day, and we're all Bill Murray and we're doing more wild and more outlandish things each and every day because we don't think it matters, right?
And speaking
because
about
tomorrow, we're just going to reset anyway, and it's going to be the same thing Friday that it was on Thursday. So why not have that extra bottle tonight? Because tomorrow it doesn't matter anyway. And so I think you've got to understand that this is for now. It is not forever. There is an end. Just because we know and can't pinpoint when exactly that is, doesn't mean it's not coming. And you want to be set up to be the best version of yourself, or as close to it as possible when that day gets here.
That's exactly.
Yeah, and I'd also like to say, speaking of being the best version of yourself, I'd like to give a special shout out and thank you, to LeRon Barton. LeRon is our West Coast hero tonight, and he's right in the middle of his own life, but he decided he could join us. And one thing that's really important to know about LeRon is that he's a writer, an author, a TEDx speaker, a cultural disruptor, which right now in this time of the world is needed more than anything because we're in a radical time in itself. He's an equity consultant, and he's a race commentator. And so one of the reasons that it's also awesome that he could pinch hit tonight and join us, and possibly join us in future shows as well, is that when we talk about PTSD and stress and shock value, sometimes we watch so many things in the world and on TV that it's almost like we're vicariously traumatized. And maybe we'll kick it to Dr. Ish, and then LeRon give you a few minutes to kind of just ease into it and think about it. But, what happens when we see this stuff on TV and then we compare it to what's happening in the world?
Yeah, so group trauma or vicarious trauma is real, right? It's a very real thing. And we all felt that with George Floyd. That's why we saw the reaction that we did. We're all still feeling that with COVID-19 right now. What a lot of folks who aren't professionals don't realize is that you don't have to be the one who was involved or directly targeted in order to have PTSD symptoms. You can simply have seen it or heard about it and been afraid or shocked when you were visualizing how it happened or re-experiencing some type of old wounds that you still had that remind you of that personal trauma, like watching something like that on TV. Also, you see it a lot through the video games. So that can be harmful if you don't have a way to frame it, and you don't have a place to put it, and you don't have a way to conceptualize it. But it can be extraordinarily helpful if you're able to view that through a therapeutic lens with a bit of perspective.
Right.
LeRon, what are you seeing in terms of that shock value?
For me, I don't think that those that the videos of Black people being killed, I don't think those are beneficial to us to watch at all. I like to refer to them as snuff films, and for those who don't know what a snuff film is, that's a film that was sort of found. within the underground, say around like the 70s and 80s, that show people actually being killed. I think that the problem with those films, Louisa, is that when we see them, they sort of, I guess, normalize Black death, right? So it's like we're sort of desensitized seeing someone like a George Floyd being killed. We're desensitized with seeing a Black person lose their life. So what that does is that sends a signal to us subconsciously that says, you know what, this is the way that they are supposed to die. This is the way that they are supposed to be handled. If you look at it, we don't see those films of white people being killed that way. So it kind of reminds me of back in the day when people would go to lynchings as well as the hangings. People used to take pictures, and back then a hanging was like it was like an event. It was like, you know, people would come out, they would grill food, they would have cookouts, and this Black person would be lynched. And so people would take photographs, and these photographs would sometimes be used or transformed into postcards. So I kind of feel like that these videos today, it's the modern day lynching postcard. And I don't think specifically as a Black person, it does nothing for my psyche to watch that.
Yeah, and I think that's exactly where we are right now in the world, that we're having this extreme shock value. And one of the things we like to do at the beginning of every call is sort of like to set the intentions for the rest of the call and to really kind of reel us in from all of those graphic images that we're seeing in the world. So Alyssa, what are some thoughts on the day for setting our intentions on recovering from the shock value of all the things we're seeing around us?
I think artful is a really important word. That independent of how ugly the world can seem, and it can be really ugly. We know this. If we approach life from a heartful place, I think we're more resilient and more capable of having empathy for other people's experience. And I think that the people who make the difference in other people's lives are operating from a place of heart. You can be the smartest intellectual ever, but if you're sitting with a coldness of heart, I don't think that translates well. I really have always believed that a heartful approach to life matters, and it is even more important when the world seems so broken and brutal. I think that we will likely not right every wrong we've seen in our lives.
And I think that
we can change, you know, how we look at each other every single moment. And I hope that the goal for all of us is how can we be kinder to other people, period, the end.
that's such a good message, because I think that's what happens. For so long, we keep things hidden in our heart. Sometimes, like Dr. Ish was talking about in a prior call, sometimes we don't even remember why we're doing what we're doing, because whatever caused us to do it happened so long ago. It just became kind of our new bad habit, or our new natural reaction to something that we tried to bury deep within ourselves. And that's exactly where PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, comes into play. So Dr. Ish, can you help us out here? What exactly is PTSD? Can it be resolved? And what are some helpful tips for someone who has PTSD?
Okay, so start to your first point. What is it? PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. It is a stress-related disorder that develops after an exposure to an event or an ordeal in which death or severe bodily harm occurred or was threatened, right? Either your life was threatened or you saw the life of someone threatened and taken, right? And those effects can be very, very physical or very emotional. And again, remember, you don't have to have been the one directly involved. It could be somebody you saw. It could be something you watched on TV. It could be a family member who you heard about it happening. And so, there's a long list of ways to get exposed to that. So what does that mean? That, well, who's at risk for it? Well, anybody who's who's had this kind of event happen or who may have risk for that happening. But you've got an increased incidence for a certain group of people, right? Rescue workers, for sure. Survivors of shooting or bombings. When you think about the folks in Beirut right now, in Lebanon, military troops, rape and domestic violence survivors have a higher incidence of it, obviously. Any abuse, childhood or adult, any act of violence that you've ever seen, right? So here's a distinction. For me, when people come to see me, we've got one or two things happening. So if it's in the first 30 days after the event, we call that acute stress disorder. That's an acute stress reaction that can be normal, right? You're going to have these symptoms. You're going to have this heightened emotional response. And then after a month, it's going to go away. If it doesn't go away after a month, or if it's just starting to emerge after a month, that means it's PTSD now, right? Now you're in the clinical range, and now we can understand that there's certain symptoms you're going to have: nightmares, flashbacks. You're going to feel like you're reliving it, right? There's a reliving or re-experiencing category, and those symptoms are the nightmares, the flashbacks, those intense emotions when you think about it. You can have some increased heart rate, sweaty palms, shortness of breath, feeling faint. You're just feeling like you're about to have a panic attack. Then there's a category of hyperarousal, which is a lot of what we're seeing now. As the crime rates are spiking, domestic violence rates are spiking, people get easily startled, super irritable, angry outbursts. You're always feeling keyed up or on edge. People get hypervigilant. We're always on guard for the next threat, right? Where's the next threat coming from? And we don't sleep well. Very bad concentration, and we start to see some self-destructive behavior, which again, we're seeing now. Drug rates are going up. Substance use, alcohol use is going up. So in a nutshell, that's really what it is. So if you're having these disturbing thoughts or you're feelings about it, and they're severe, and you feel like you're having trouble getting your life back after 30 days after the thing happened, then it's time to see a doctor.
Yeah, I want to piggyback on that. You're so clear, so thank you for that. I think it's really important definitionally for people to hear. There's a lot of comorbidity. What that means is PTSD is often accompanied by or self-medicated by drugs and alcohol. There's also a high comorbidity between PTSD and suicidality, okay? So if ever, and this applies a lot to veterans, this applies a lot to women and children and men who have been in domestic violence situations. I had a lot of patients after 9/11 who were really categorically just so at odds with themselves that they didn't want to continue living. I'm sure Louisa, as she always does, will be thorough in providing resource hotlines for you. Don't discount your feelings. They're really important, and there is help for you. PTSD is incredibly, incredibly debilitating, but it doesn't have to be permanent. They're not only tremendous interventions that can be psychiatric, but also therapeutic. And I think it's really important to know that it's really a normal human response. I think people feel a lot of shame, like I should be stronger, I should muscle up, like, everybody else has had it worse than I, so what's wrong with me? And that self-stigmatizing only perpetuates the cycle of not getting help. So know that PTSD is a human experience, as Dr. Ish has spoken so clearly too, and that there is help. So really ask for it, because everybody's constitution is different, and everybody's life experience is different, and everybody's temperament's different. So the comparison game is not valid here. Just because something might undo me and not undo you doesn't mean that I don't have legitimate PTSD. Okay.
Yeah, and there's actually a question in the chat right now, almost directly related to what you just said, Alyssa. There's a question in the chat about what you do with survivor guilt related to suicide. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I will share a personal anecdote that I think is an important vignette. When I was 19 years old, my boyfriend, one of my first loves, overdosed on drugs and died. And, I was so young now, I'm 46 years old, and I look back and I think to myself, what a cataclysmic experience for such a young person. And I had such ambivalence about my own life after that for about 6 months, because I just thought to myself, what was so, special about me that I deserve to live? And it just takes time, and I had to seek help. And I had to understand that sometimes really bad things happen to really good people, and the world isn't always meritorious, and that the guilt isn't helpful. It's actually just a distraction from coping with the absolute dire heartbreak and fear. The guilt is always just a distraction. It's a really good one. Like, guilt is really a crazy enemy. Like, it'll sneak in and it'll like eat you from the inside out. But it is really only a distraction. So if you are somebody who has stayed alive when others haven't, cherish your life and fight for your life and ask for tremendous help, because you are worthy. You are worthy of living. The guilt is just a liar. Guilt just lies. It just straight up lies.
And the other thing is, you want to find a way to give the life that was lost some meaning, right? Because that will help you get your meaning back. Okay, I lost my boyfriend. I was fresh out of the box. What does that mean? How can I now honor their life through the life that I still have, right? And if you can find that, right, what is turn that situation of suffering now turn that into your cause, right? It was a messy situation, turn it into your message. Give it some meaning, right? Make it bigger than you. And then that will help push you forward, and you feel like, okay, it wasn't a senseless loss. It does have some meaning. I am still here because now I'm going to pick up this torch and I'm going to carry this mantle. I'm going to champion this cause, and that can really help you get through some of those dark days.
I love you saying that, Louisa. I know I'm over talking, but I have to just say one thing. That's exactly right. So yeah. I knew I wanted to endeavor to be a psychologist while in college, but after my boyfriend died, I decided that I was going to devote myself wholeheartedly to understanding addiction and trauma and how I could be the best resource to people suffering. And I went on to get 2 masters and study my PhD and run dual diagnosis clinics that specialize in individuals addicted to heroin. So there was purpose there for me, and that meaning that Dr. Ish talks about. It's absolutely critical to having a sense of agency and to have the world make sense.
Yep.
Yeah, I think that's so important because one of the things that I rarely talk about is that my own sister actually committed suicide when I was much younger. And I spent a lot of time trying to figure it out and sort it out. And what I realized after I became a therapist was that some of the literature and the books that were geared towards teenagers actually were more helpful than my PhD level books that I was reading by renowned experts. And the reason for that is when it's written at a level for a teenager, that's really when a lot of things go wrong, because between ages 13 and 18 is the fidelity time period when you're trying to figure out who you are. And a lot of times that role development gets confusing. And that ultimately is one of the contributing factors when people are lost and searching for that meaning. And so one book that I'll call out that has really, kind of been monumental in my life is a simple book called No One Saw My Pain. And it's written really through the eyes of a teenager. And it's a very good book about really just being able to see things in others because they're hurting, that you may not realize that they're hurting. How do you get past all that stuff that's so bad?
That's a really good question. I think that you have to have I can sit up here and say you have to have a mental fortitude that's so strong that you can just push past everything. But for me, it all kind of goes back to my support system. My mother, my father, my brother, he's my best friend in the entire world. Having friends that actually really, really care, and not only really care, but that will lift you up and that will correct you when you are wrong. Having a mentor in my high school writing mentor, Stan Banks, having people that really want your best, interest at heart. And, that's easier said than done, right? I mean, there's a lot of people that, want you to fail. There's a lot of people that have their own stuff going on and, they can't, they're like, look, I'm so busy over here. I can't dedicate that time towards you. But I would say if you don't have family, if you don't have friends, I would say find a mentor. Like, it's just like what Maya Angelou said, we don't make it out here alone. Everyone has somebody. So I would just say that. And another thing I would say, Louisa, is to realize that failure is just temporary. Nelson Mandela once said, either you win or learn, right? And so, even if you fail at something, that doesn't mean that that's it. I mean, yeah, it stings at the time. I mean, I remember when last year I was not accepted for this TEDx, and and I was really crushed. And so, what I did was I allowed myself time to kind of grieve that, to kind of work through my feelings, because something that Dr. Gruber said that makes a lot of sense is that you have to give yourself time to feel. It's having a foundation and realizing that failure is only temporary, and you're almost always going to have a chance to turn it around.
I think that's what it is. So many times, we do something and we just get through it. And so the next time it happens, it's like we wash, rinse, repeat. They do the same negative reaction to what we keep doing. And one of the things I'd like to call out is mentors are so critical and so important, but sometimes you're right. You just might not have someone. Well, you see those books behind me right there? When I couldn't reach someone, I read them all, right? And so that's really important, because books are the words of people that have been mentored, right? And if there's anyone here who says, well, I didn't have a good father figure, there's a book called Tuesdays with Morrie, written by Mitch Albom.
I've seen that book.
And it's a story of a young man talking to an older man. And it's just really like life lessons. And that's one of the inspirations for this show. And I think that that's ultimately the goal, to learn to turn negative life experiences into gratitude. Alyssa, how do you do that?
Well, I wish I could say that it were just a switch that's turned, but I do think that it's a definite walking through the tangled forest of the heart. And like any walk in the forest, certainly one can do that alone, but I can imagine it's much more pleasant and feels safer with a companion. So I think that we have to look at what has happened, and sometimes it's really scary. Sometimes when we are looking back at what has happened to us or we've been exposed to, it really fractures our sense of safety in the world. So I think that we partner with somebody, a clinician, a therapist, a pastor, a family member, who can accompany us on the journey of rediscovering safety. And out of that safety is born gratitude. It's very hard to feel grateful and feel scared at the same time. Like, I know it's preached, and I know that there are gurus and people all over who say, yes, like, dive into the fear. I encourage that, but some fear is so treacherous to the heart that it's hard to be grateful until you've really cleared away some of it and given yourself some space to heal. So I think it just takes some time. I think it takes tremendous courage. Like, let me say that flat out. People who look at their lives directly are rock stars. They are rock stars. You want to ask me who I respect? I respect people who have undergone and have gone through and come out the other side shining so bright and resilient that they look around at life and say, I am here. And every single breath that I take is going to be valuable to me. The one thing I would caution against is only being grateful when we are on the other side of things, though. So it's a little bit a sprinkle of gratitude, a sprinkle of hope, add in some fear. You know, I always say, like, 2 steps forward, 1 step back, 3 around the block. Like, healing's not linear. That's the thing. And I'm sure Dr. Ish can speak to this explicitly. Like, I have never once met a person who just sort of cruised or did the 5 cycles of grief exactly. Like, everybody has bumps in the road. And the minute you think you're past it, I promise you, it'll tickle you just lightly on the back. Something will trigger you. But I like to say this. When trauma happens, often people don't feel the trauma because they begin dissociating and they feel like they're actually in the eye of the hurricane. It's quiet, you know, like you're sort of sitting there watching the world spin out of control around you and you're just sort of frozen in time and space. Eventually that hurricane subsides and it becomes a gale force wind. And eventually it becomes a bad storm. And eventually it becomes a breeze. And maybe 5 years down the road, you'll be walking somewhere and you'll smell something and it'll just be some little tickle on the back of your neck. But just maintain hope. It does change.
But isn't that what's happening right now, Alyssa? Isn't that, I think right now, like in COVID, when we look at the stages of grief and even like the longer stages of adjustment beyond the 5, you know, shock, numbness, denial, which is I think where we kind of are now. You know, first we were shocked. Oh my gosh, what is this? Then we were numb for a few months. All right, we got to stay home. We got to wear a mask, right? And now we're sort of like in denial. Some people aren't wearing masks. Some people are just, you know, going and doing things like they would always do. And then there's this like the troughs of sorrow, which is like the shock, numbness, denial, and then the isolation, the guilt, the grief, the distress, the deep depression, which is coming. We're not even there yet. And so the whole idea is when you feel this way, you know, the only thing that gets you out of that after you get through the anger and the isolation and the despair and the disorganization is to do something new. And so LeRon, when you think about disruption, even in this time of COVID pandemic, and you're on the West Coast, so the numbers are really high there, right? So right. The key to getting through all of this, the key to getting beyond PTSD, the key to getting beyond these remnants of complex trauma is the something new. It is the disruption. LeRon, what do you think? What can people do?
Well, I think that people need to keep a level head. I mean, you can become so wrapped up into this because look, we've never been through anything like this in our lifetimes. I mean, this is something that has affected everybody throughout the entire planet at the same time, right? So I think that we do need to adhere to safety protocols, you know, but at the same time, you have to find that little bit of sunshine throughout the storm, you know. And what I mean by that is that dedicate and start making time to doing things that make you happy. For me, I'm a writer, so I love to write. I love to work out. I take walks. I'm gonna start baking. Like, you know, it's just stuff that will just kind of take my mind off it. Because look, COVID-19 is not going anywhere. And while we have this major health scare that can attack our bodies, we need to be also as vigilant with our minds. I mean, you know, it's something that Dr. Gruber said when I first came on. You know, we all sort of take this in differently. And so I think that going to see a mental health professional is just paramount. I mean, I see a therapist twice a month. It's one of the best decisions I ever made in my life. And specifically, Louisa, as a Black man, I mean, seeing obviously the deaths of George Floyd and couple this with COVID, I mean, this could wreak havoc on your mental stability. So I would say find your peace, you know, do things that are constructive, but also if you can, you know, try to find a mental health therapist. I mean, these are unprecedented times and it'll definitely help you out.
I think that's really good advice. And I think one of the things that's important to do is when you're waiting for an appointment or when you're just getting ready, start taking notes. Make little notes of what you'd like to talk to a therapist about. And I think that sometimes that keeps you on track because then when you finally get to the appointment, probably the thing that was bothering you, it might not be bothering you anymore, or something different will be bothering you. And that's some of the things that lead to stress because, you know, it always compiles with the next thing. And every day you're a different version of yourself.
No, I think you just really need to be aware of where your life is, right? If this thing is, if you are struggling and you have been struggling for more than 30 days, then it's probably time to talk to somebody, right? You know, LeRon made a super good point, which is, you know, you've got to reach out to the folks who are close to you, family, because they can see the things that everybody else can't, right? They can see you checking out. They can see you detaching. They can see you avoiding some of those people, places, or things that remind you of the bad stuff that's going on. And when it's time to see a therapist, when it's time to see somebody like me who can provide medication and therapy, you need to know what the goal is. The goal is to help you reframe your risk and understand what is a true threat and what is not, because everything isn't a threat, but in the midst of PTSD, you feel like everything is a threat to you. And you got to understand how you feel about it. Do I feel ashamed about this? Do I feel guilty about this? Do I feel embarrassed about it? Do I feel humiliated about it? And you need to be able to communicate that effectively, because like Alyssa said earlier, you know, this goes hand in hand with depression, anxiety, and substance use, right? And so the first thing you want to do, and the goal of therapy, the goal of seeing somebody like me with medication is to feel better. And the first thing we can do to help that happen is get a good night's sleep. Mm-hmm. So nothing gets better without that. So that is the first thrust. Absolutely. And then there's a lot of other things we can do, whether it's medications over here, different types of therapy over here, CBT, EMDR, whatever that's the case, but understand where your life is at. Always do that self-check and say, hey, you know what? I am not feeling or doing well, let me go see who I can call, who I can talk to, what are the resources out there for me, and have a quick trigger when it comes to that.
So it's okay to not be okay, and there's nothing to be ashamed of for going to see a mental health professional. I mean, look, I go to the gym 3 to 4 times a week. I'm concerned about my physical health. I'm also as concerned about my mental health and I think Alyssa, Louisa, you said this: where the mind goes, the body goes. So, we need to all make sure that both mental and physical is straight.
I also want to share that there's a term called trauma-informed care. So if you don't know what you're asking for and you're not sure if it's PTSD, the question that you can ask is, does your outpatient office or does your therapist provide trauma-informed care? That's sort of the generic term that kind of encapsulates it all, that someone has had experience or at least a little bit of continuing education on specifics needed to deal with that type of care. And so, yeah, go ahead, Alyssa.
I just want to add one thing. There are different levels of trauma too, just to be very clear. I think people say, I don't have PTSD because I wasn't in a car accident or I didn't experience a rape. Those are complex traumas. You can have the experience of death by 1,000 paper cuts with trauma, which means that you have things that feel traumatic to you, which compile. So don't hesitate to ask for help because you haven't had this grievous, huge explosion in your life. Because I think I hear that a lot with patients, like, well, I didn't experience a loss or I wasn't abused, so I couldn't have had trauma. It's like sometimes just being in the world can be traumatic.
And the last part there is, it's not a comparison shopping thing, right? What's traumatic for me may not be traumatic for you or LeRon, right? And so it's all relative, and there's no such thing as, good, better, best, or greater or less than. If the feeling is there, you trust how you feel.
That's right.
And that's exactly right. And sometimes when that feeling is there and you're overwhelmed with all the things you have to do throughout the day, throughout the week, throughout the month, sometimes all you have is 1 minute for yourself. And that brings us to our next segment, our mindful minute. And so, Alyssa, the minute is yours.
So I want to say that many people who've experienced trauma do have difficulty closing their eyes. So if you are somebody who's experienced trauma and it doesn't feel safe to close your eyes, you can leave them open. But let's place our hand on our hearts. Just quietly, if you feel comfortable closing your eyes. And just as you breathe in, say to yourself, I am safe. I am loved. I am safe. I am loved. I am safe. And I am loved. I am safe. And I am loved. I am safe. And I am loved. And allow that sense of comfort fill your heart. As you open your eyes, know that your breath always gives you an opportunity to connect deeply with yourself. So gently open your eyes, knowing you are safe, you are loved, and the world cares about you. And there are people who are really eager to help. If you need help, ask for it. There's no shame in asking for help. The strongest, most resilient people who have the most fulfilling lives do not go at it alone. As Ram Dass, the 1960s guru, said, and I love it, we're all just walking each other home. There's no truer truth than that. We are all just walking each other home.
I love that. I love that. It's awesome.
Oh, yeah.
Anything you'd like to add, Dr. Ush?
You know what? I think some of the smallest things can become the biggest triggers. So understand how some of those everyday things in life can really be setting you off. Somebody's birthday who's no longer here, an anniversary of a loved one's death, right? A sight, a smell, a situation, somebody who looks similar that can put you back in that space. So always be aware of your surroundings and how you are and are not being triggered.
Absolutely. Anything you'd like to leave us with, LeRon?
Yes, I would say that be easy on yourself. I mean, these are incredibly rough times. I mean, as someone who is hypercritical, I'm learning to just, take it take it easy on myself, you know? So, I mean, again, like these are incredibly rough times. So just, you know, just take the load off a bit.
That's right. And PTSD is very complex. It often starts in childhood with complex trauma, and sometimes it's a silent journey. So even being willing to participate in a call and discuss it, it shows that you're taking a step in the right direction, and it's a step of courage. And sometimes if you know someone needs to have this conversation, a quick sharing of even this episode is enough that just might save someone's life. And I hope that all of you tonight, that your numb hearts be softened as you embrace this delicate process of overcoming all of the trauma that we're all experiencing right now, no matter where we are across the lifespan. And I'd like to close out with a quote from Anais Nin. May the day come when the risk it will take that you remain tightly closed in your bud be greater than the risk it will take you to bloom. Because it doesn't have to be doom, doom, doom. It can be doom and bloom. You're only one step away from a whole new beginning with a small seed that you will plant. And that's Life, Love, and Lessons.
Lily don't pay no mind, she ain't got a mind to pay. Papa working overtime to buy Lily new dress today. Some say she's deaf and dumb, well I say her poor heart's just numb since her mama died in 93. Her brothers, they went away, found it much too hard to stay, so they left her with daddy. All these years Lily filled the swamp with tears, singing la 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 la. Lily wants to see the world, so she reads books to learn. And she gonna travel far, every picture page is turned. The Great Wall and the Vatican, she sees them and goes back again. Well, this is how she gets to see the world. Some say she's deaf and dumb, well I say her poor heart's just numb from everything a little girl can learn. And all these years Lily fills that old swamp with tears, singing la 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 la. Lily likes the old tire swing when daddy pushes her real high. Well, she